Go ahead and recording. Tonight we're going to look at, I don't know how far we're going to get in an hour, but I've got listed out to do Galatians 2 and the first 10 verses, I guess. And we have a few folks that are probably calling in. So I'll go ahead and read this. Galatians 2, 1 and 2. Then after 14 years, I went up again to Jerusalem with Barnabas, taking Titus with me. Because of a revelation, I went up and presented to them the good news that I proclaim among the Gentiles. But I did so privately to those who seemed to be influential, to make sure I had not run in vain. I would not run or had not run in vain. So Shaul, or Paul, he begins the chapter by recounting a trip that he had made to Jerusalem. Now this was either 14 years after the Damascus Road experience or the 14 years since his last trip. So it would have been either 14 years or 17 years before he went to Jerusalem. Now the timeline is not real clear. We don't really know. But it had been a long time since he got to Jerusalem. So the distance from Antioch to Jerusalem is it's about 300 miles. And if you take the Via Maris, which is the coast road, it's a coastal route, and if you figure it's going to be like 20 miles a day if you're walking, if you could do 20 miles a day consistently, it would take them about 15 days of pretty consistent walking to make that trip. So I see that evidently Shaul did not feel compelled to go to the feast 3 times a year. He didn't make it. That's a long trip when you have to travel at least a minimum of 2 weeks. Just to go one time, and then so if he combined some of the feasts and so forth, that and just stayed over, then you could say, well, okay, that you make 2 trips to Jerusalem a year, but even so, that's 2 trips. You'd end up a minimum of 1 month of travel time plus any time that you stay there. So it could easily chew up 2, maybe 3 months in a year of just going to the feast. So Paul didn't do that, and I suspect that a lot of most people didn't do that. The Bible even talks about that. If you're too far away, then just take the money that you would have used for the feast and that you had set aside from your tithes and so forth, and then just right there where you are, you celebrate. It says celebrate as unto the Lord, and it also says that you get the food that you need and get whatever strong drink that you desire. So the Bible even says that you can indulge in an adult beverage when you celebrate before the Lord. And he says, and don't forget the Levites. Don't leave them out. Remember, they did not have an inheritance, so it was incumbent upon everyone else to support the Levites both in the land and then evidently outside the land, because it talked about the idea of if it was too far away. And if you were in the land, it probably wasn't too far away. So that was an aside. So Paul's traveling partner on this trip was Barnabas, and if we look at Barnabas, he was a Cypriot Jew of the tribe of Levi. His name meant the son of consolation, and his surname was Joseph, and he was a Levite. His name stands first on the list of prophets and teachers of the church at Antioch. And Luke speaks of him as a good man in Acts 11:24. And he was born of Jewish parents, like I said, of the tribe of Levi, native of Cyprus, where he had possessions. And he either had possessions in Cyprus or in the land, because later on it's said that he sold the land and gave it for the support of the early believers. When they sold what they had and then combined it for the support of those people. Now, remember that the people there in Jerusalem, they anticipated the soon return of the Lord. They expected he was going to come any day. So this idea of all living together, waiting it out, was something that we had to, you have to think about with the early church. He said his personal appearance was supposed to have been very dignified and commanding. So he's a pretty impressive man. When Paul returned to Jerusalem after his conversion, Barnabas took him and introduced him to the apostles, and they possibly were companions. They'd been companions as students of Gamaliel. So the story is that Barnabas was also a student of Gamaliel. So the prosperity of the church at Antioch led the apostles and the brethren at Jerusalem to send Barnabas up there to Antioch to kind of look into their, kind of superintend or overlook the new movement of believers, the believers in the Nazarenes. And if you remember right, it was Antioch where the believers were first called Christians. And he found the work was so extensive and just so busy that he actually sent to Tarsus he went to Tarsus to search for Paul to come down and assist him. And Paul returned with him to Antioch, and they labored together for a whole year. Acts 11:25 and 26 says, and the two of them were at the end of this period when there was a contribution from Antioch down to the church in Jerusalem for the poor brethren. Now, shortly after they returned, bringing John Mark with them, they were appointed as missionaries to the heathen world, and in this capacity, they visited Cyprus and some of the other principal cities. We talked about that last week, going up into Galatia. And so returning from this first missionary journey to Antioch, they were again sent up to Jerusalem, this time to consult with the church. And I think this was the time when they brought an offering to Jerusalem. Remember now that the idea of what to do with the Gentiles in the new movement had not yet been codified, or a ruling had not been made, because the Jerusalem council had not taken place at this point. One of the other people that went with Paul here was Titus, and Titus was a Gentile. It says in Galatians 2:20, and he was led to faith in Yeshua by Paul. And he was drawn to the ministry and became a co-worker with Paul. And he accompanied Paul and Barnabas from Antioch to Jerusalem. And Titus is included in the quote unquote other believers in Acts 15:2 at the Jerusalem Council. Titus would have been a prime example of the born again Gentile Christian. So Titus was living proof that the rite of circumcision was unnecessary for salvation. Here was Titus, who was helping Rav Shaul, or Paul, in his ministry. He was a very helpful person to Paul, and so basically, I mean, he must have been just completely above reproach, because when they had their meetings there in Jerusalem, where Paul says he met with with Yaakov or James, Peter, and John. Titus was with them. So Shaul explained to the Galatians that he went up to Jerusalem because of a revelation. And we see that this is like the second revelation that Paul mentions in some of his writings. It seemed that he had many such visions or revelations in his life and ministry. And but this we don't really know for sure, but this particular revelation came from a visiting prophet from Jerusalem. Now, some of the authors that I've been reading have said, well, maybe there was a second revelation that came to Paul, that he needed to go to Jerusalem to talk to the founders of the new movement about this Gentile problem. But it just seems like that in the story of Acts, taking everything in context, it there's a good story, a good reason to think that it was probably this prophet from Jerusalem, because it's in Acts 11:27 to 30. It said, now in these days prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch. One of them, named Agabus, stood up and predicted through the Ruach, the Holy Spirit, that there was going to be a great famine over the world. This took place during the reign of Claudius. And so the disciples decided to send relief to those brothers and sisters living in Judea, each according to his ability. And they did, sending it to the elders by the hand of Barnabas and Shaul or Paul. And notice here that in this Acts verses, they mention Barnabas first. And I think this is the only place that they mention Barnabas first, because after that, it's Paul and Barnabas. You never hear of Barnabas and Paul. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And so as a result of this prophecy, the congregation of Antioch, they took up offerings for the believers in Judea. Now, it's kind of interesting that the famine had not yet occurred, and yet these people were so tuned in to God and to the Holy Spirit that when this prophet Agabus gave them this prophecy, evidently he was held in pretty high esteem also, and was trusted, because he said there's going to be a famine. And so they said, wow, if there's going to be this famine, let's go ahead and take up some money here now, and we'll send it down there just in case. I was sitting here thinking about that, and how would we react today if somebody says, there's going to be terrible earthquakes in Israel, and there's going to be a war, and they're going to need all the this money, and it's going to happen here in the future. Let's go ahead and take up a collection for them right now, and we'll send it over there for this future event. I don't think we would I just don't think we would work that way. But these people had a lot of faith in this prophet, and evidently they were just really tuned in. So anyway, I digress there a little bit. This relief, though, it would become extremely critical, because the famine, it possibly occurred between 46 and 48 current era, and it lasted for 3 years. And it was quite extensive along the eastern shore of the Mediterranean. In fact, there were a lot of people that did die as a result of the famine, and it was known back in the days as the days of scarcity. And also, if you note that you remember last week, or week before last, we talked about the story of Izates, the king of that Italian-sounding name over there in Persia called Adiabene, that he and his mother, actually, they emptied out the national treasury to send food and money to Israel. I mean, these people, they had become believers in the one true God, and they put their money where the mouth was. his advisors came to Azotus and said, look, this is what you're depleting all of our treasury for these guys down in there in Israel. And so what did Azotus do? He answered every one of their objections with Scripture. And so it's not, his answers and so forth were not in the Bible, but it was in Jewish writings of the time, where they did talk about what his response was and how did he do it. He just did it with Scripture. That this is basically, if you bless the Jews, you will be blessed, was one thing. And then he brought in Psalms and other things about it was right for them to do this. Let's see, we got a comment here that believers have a difficult time giving after an epic event. After the event, well, I think they have a hard time giving after event. We see that sometimes. How much harder would it have been for them to give even before the event, when they, when it really hadn't happened at that point yet? So I just think it was a testament to their faith. And aside from the poor Jewish believers of the first century were called the Ebionim. In other words, and we call them the Ebionites today. And later on, there was a sect of Jewish believers that called themselves by the name of Ebionites or Ebionites, but they were unrelated to this prophecy, or this prophecy and this fast here from the believers in Judea. Okay, this gift that Shaul and Barnabas brought to Jerusalem had a twofold purpose. One was and this, talking about that revelation. The gift that they brought down, one purpose was to provide, of course, stores for the future relief of the Judeans. And this was similar to what, remember what Joseph did in Egypt so many years before, where in the good years they gathered up the food for the bad years. And of course, the other side of the donation was possibly to provide goodwill in the eyes of the Jewish Jerusalem community, the Messianic Jews in Jerusalem, to provide goodwill for those up in Antioch, which were kind of a mixed blood group. There were Jews and Gentiles, and most probably a lot of assimilated Jews up there that people would have considered, not real. Okay, you may be Jewish, but you're not really kosher because one of your parents was not Jewish. And so there were two aspects possibly of that contribution. And while in Jerusalem, Shaul met privately with Yaakov, James. Remember, that's the author of the book of James, but his real name was Yaakov. He was the brother of Yeshua. He met with Peter and John, and they talked about this idea of his gospel to the Gentiles. And he, I'm sure that Paul had some kind of trepidation about whether his teaching was going to be accepted or not, because what did he say in the Bible? It talked about up there in the second verse there. He said, he talked to them to make sure I would not run or had not run in vain. That's another way of just saying that I wanted to make sure that what I was talking about, or what I had been preaching, was going to meet with their approval, so that if it didn't meet with their approval, then he would have had to have rethought all of his what he was doing, and whether or not he was going to continue with this, or if he was going to fight against it or what. So Paul's gospel was it was pretty controversial. If you just really want to know, it had huge implications for the public face of the believers and for the constitution of the synagogue, not just for the believing synagogues, but also Jewish synagogues everywhere. Because if this started to be accepted within the confines of the Messianic groups, the Messianic congregations there, then there would necessarily have been a spillover into the Jewish synagogues. Remember when he was up in Galatia, that he had taught this to in the churches in Galatia. The first couple of times, when he'd teach it to the Jewish people and the God-fearers and the proselytes, some of them accepted it, but then the ones that really, really accepted it were the Gentiles, and so that just threw a wrench in the works there with the Jews. So Paul, by even going to Jerusalem with this message, he had tacitly submitted himself to the authority of the apostles. He wanted their approval. I mean, there's I don't think that you can say that he was being arrogant or anything like that, but in some of his language, he definitely wanted the approval, and he wanted it so that everyone would know that what he's teaching is correct, and it had the approval. Now, Paul also brought Barnabas and Titus with him to meet with James and or Yaakov, Peter, and John. And so, if this meeting, if it made Paul or Shaul uncomfortable, can you imagine how uncomfortable it would have made Titus? Because here Titus is the token pagan, token former pagan in this group, and he's uncircumcised, and so he could have met with a tremendous amount of opposition or prejudice, and it could have been a little dicey there. But Paul goes on in Galatians 2 and 3, or 2, 3 through 5 there. It says, yet not even Titus, who was with me. He basically spilled the beans to the congregation in Galatia. He told them up front what the results of their meeting was. He said, yet not even Titus, who was with me, a Greek, was forced to be circumcised. Now, this issue came up because of false brothers secretly brought in who slipped in to spy out our freedom in Messiah in order to bring us into bondage. But we did not give in to them, not even for a moment, so that the truth of the good news might be preserved for you. Remember now, Paul is talking to in the Galatians. He's talking to actually the pagans that had converted, had come to faith. So he's talking to Gentiles. He's not talking. He's not addressing this to the Jews. So keep that in mind. Who he's talking to, who is his audience. So all right, then let me get back to my notes here. Okay, it appears in this. Let's see, who are these false brothers that he's talking about? Now, Mark Nanos speculates that. Let me get back here. Okay, there you go. Mark Nanos says that possibly, in his book on the irony of Galatians, that the false brothers were non-believing Jews who were investigating what was going on. I I think there's others that think that the false brothers were possibly fellow believers who still held to the circumcision requirement, so that you know, they were still kind of trying to disrupt things, because they had an agenda. They truly believed that you should be circumcised to be part of the community of Israel, and but we don't really know. So there's speculation on both parts as to who that could have been. Now, where did they slip in? Again, there's some speculation here. Did they slip in the meetings in Antioch? Were they there, or did they slip in there in meetings in Jerusalem? Did they come in and basically talk behind Paul's back and try to influence James and the other apostles? I don't know. I think it's. I would say that they probably slipped in somehow there in Antioch, so that they could kind of get a handle on what it was that Paul was preaching, so that they could somehow discredit his teaching. So, but Paul gives away the farm here. In terms of the information, he says the results of the meeting was that Titus was not forced to become circumcised. They didn't tell, Yaakov and Peter and John didn't tell him and says, "Hey, Paul, look, you're going to have to get Titus circumcised if he's going to be with you and you're continuing preaching the gospel." But they didn't do that. They didn't do that. Let's go on with the 6th verse here. But for those who were reputed to be somewhat whatsoever they were, it makes no difference to me. God accepted not man's person. So, okay, read this again. It said, but those who seem to be influential, and then you got this parenthetical there. Whatever that makes, no difference to me. God shows no partiality. Well, those influential ones added nothing to my message. On the contrary, they saw that I had been entrusted with the good news for the uncircumcised, just as Peter was for the circumcised. For the same God who is at work in Peter as an emissary to the Jews also was at work in me as an emissary to the Gentiles. Realizing the favor that had been given to me, Yaakov, Peter, and John, who are the recognized pillars, shook hands in partnership with Barnabas and me, so that we would go to the Gentiles and they to the Jews. They ask only that we remember the poor, something that I was eager to do. Now, if you look at this right at the very beginning of this, in verse 6, you kind of struck with something. It appears that Paul is kind of, I don't know, he's kind of dissing the apostles in Jerusalem. He describes them as those who seem to be influential. So I don't know, that seemed to me like it was something that he could have been, that people would look at it, and if they're already trying to discredit Paul in nowadays with the Christians and the commentators, they're all trying to discredit Paul and his teachings of the law, or that he's somehow telling or teaching people that they shouldn't be keeping the law. Wouldn't he also have denigrated the apostles? The people that were the head of the movement at that point. So he described them as those who seemed to be influential. Whatever they were, I don't care what they were. It makes no difference to me. So, God knows. And that's kind of what he's saying. He says, yeah, these muckety mucks up there in Jerusalem, yeah, who are they? I don't know. What difference does it make who they are? That's kind of the way, the reading that a lot of people bring into it. But then he goes on to say that, makes no difference who they were. God knows, and he's not one that shows partiality. I think what he's trying to tell the people in Galatia, and especially what we call the influencers or the Judaizers, that the governing body of this fledgling Yeshua movement, they were men just like themselves. They put their toga on, same way everybody did. They didn't have pants like we do, so you couldn't put your pants on one foot at one leg at a time. But they were just like everybody else. They had flaws. They were not particularly educated. Most of the guys who were in Jerusalem, that were the head of the congregation there, they were not educated people. They had their standard Jewish education, but they would not have been educated like Paul. Paul had his as it were, his university degrees, because he had sat at the foot of Gamaliel and one of the premier Torah teachers. So Paul had his PhD, and these guys hadn't even gone to college. If you put it in those kind of terms, the idea that whoever these guys were, it says they were reputed, and later on he even talks about it again, about these guys who are reputed to be are reported to be influential. I think let's look at in this verse 7. It says, we still got to remember though that even if he's talking about the apostles, Peter, James, and John there, he had already submitted to their authority in coming to Jerusalem. So he doesn't actually mention who he's talking to here, but he also says that they were. He says they imparted nothing to me. They didn't tell me to do anything. Paul reports to the Galatians in verse 7 that the Jerusalem leaders approved of and agreed with what he was doing among the nations. He observes that they saw that I had been entrusted with the gospel to the uncircumcised, just as Peter had been entrusted with the gospel to the circumcised. Now, that's in the Revised Version. Paul's primary mission was to evangelize the uncircumcised, or the pagan Gentiles, whereas Peter's primary mission was to evangelize his own Jewish brethren. It seems to me just as a kind of it's kind of paradoxical that you in my mind, that Paul would have gone to the Gentiles, and God called him to the Gentiles with all of his highfalutin Jewish education. He would go to them rather than to the Jews, where he could use all of his education to convince all these hard-headed, stiff-necked Jews that Yeshua was the Messiah. God didn't work that way. That's we got to remember. We can't put God in a box, and try to figure out what it was that he was that what he should do. But so we shouldn't take this statement. Paul says, okay, look, everybody agreed that Peter goes to the Jews, and I go to the Gentiles, and of course we can't say that was an exclusive contract. That it was something that the Jews, that Peter was always going to go to the Jews, that he would not deal with Gentiles, and that Paul would always go to the Gentiles and not deal with the Jews. We know that wasn't correct, because what did the Bible say about every time Paul went into a new area, new city, he went to the Jews first. His practice was to go to the synagogue for 3 Shabbats and discuss and dispute or whatever with the Jews in the synagogue before then he would take his message to the Gentiles. So Paul was still doing that, but it seemed like that he had his greatest successes with the Gentiles, and so they would preach to either one, but it seemed that the focus of their work and the actual results of their work seemed to be that Paul was, and he called himself the apostle to the Gentiles, and that Peter went to the Jews. So, and in fact, we see that the apostles, for the most part, in the early days, they really didn't go out very far. They stayed there in Jerusalem and in the surrounding area, and they evangelized to their own Jewish people. I think they took it to heart when Yeshua says you go to the Jew first and then to the Greek. And so for the most part, those first early years, they did stay in the close confines of Jerusalem. But we do know that eventually, especially after 70 A.D., that when the temple was destroyed and there was a lot of persecution of the Jews, the apostles then spread out and they went to various places. I think Thomas went to India, and that's the one I can remember because we had friends from India who said that Thomas actually came to their part of India and evangelized people, and their families had been Christians in that area for 2,000 years. They were very, very quick to tell you that they were not recent converts, that their families had been Christians for 2,000 years. But if we look at verse 8 a little bit closer, Paul can write to the Galatians that for God, who is at work in the ministry of Peter as an apostle to the Jews, was also at work in my ministry as an apostle to the Gentiles. That's an NIV version. And Paul recognized that Peter had been chosen by God for a unique mission, just as he had been chosen by God for a unique mission. And that was Romans 11:13. The primary calling upon which the Jerusalem apostles was to reach out to their fellow Jews. Paul's visit here in chapter 2 was to discuss how this calling was expanding beyond Jerusalem, as Yeshua had said. Paul's words in verse 8 are important to understand, as Paul recognizes and blesses the unique diversity and specific calling that exists. Anyone in ministry today should not only recognize that God has called them to do, but recognize God's calling upon others who had been called to do different things. The key is that we all recognize that he is at work in each other. Paul also tells the Galatians that James, Cephas, or Peter, and John recognized the grace that had been given to me. That's a New Revised Standard Version. And Paul is recognized by this inner circle of Jerusalem apostles to have been given the gift of God, which likely was not just his grace given to him, but a unique ability to go out and proclaim the gospel to the nations. And this unique calling of people, it was real evident. About 3 weeks ago, where we went to a training workshop on evangelism, and we saw all sorts of folks there in this training program. That it was kind of funny because we had some people that you look at them and they had tattoos, and the girl had a ring in her nose, and where the half of the head shaved, and they just looked kind of strange, and they you look at them and said, man, what have they been smoking? And But then they sat down at our table, we talked to them, and we found out these people had a heart for and a passion for dealing with people that looked just like them, that no one else was going to, that people were being lost and going to hell because they looked weird, and the standard believer was not going to go to people that had a bunch of tattoos and piercings and stuff like that. But these people had those things, and then they came to faith, and then they had a calling to go to similar people that looked like them, had the same interests. I mean, the girl in this it was a man and woman married couple. The girl in there, the woman there, was a race car mechanic as a hobby, and so she related to this, and he was a biker. He liked motorcycles, and so they had a unique ministry. God called them to that, and after talking to them, it was very evident that these people do have a ministry. God called them to that, and God bless them, because an old fogey like me would be very ineffective trying to win people like that they were going to. Similarly, there was a group of young people that were going to the the hippy dippy coffee house groups, that hang out at Starbucks, and they were again, the red hair and the purple hair and funny clothes, and I thought to myself, there again, that's a strange bunch. But again, you talk to these kids, and they had a passion to win the lost. And so it was kind of heartening. We had another, there was a black couple there that their passion was to go into this area of Alabama where they lived and win those folks that were in the inner cities area. They wanted to win those people. So God calls each people, calls a lot of people to do different things. And so we should never, ever put God in a box and say, okay, well, this educated guy over here, Paul, he should be talking to the educated people, so that he could relate to them. And Peter, Peter was just, he was a bumpkin. He was from upstate Israel, and he had really no education. So, Peter, you got a horrible Galilean accent. You can't even speak Hebrew right. So you better stick with the uneducated bumpkins. No, what happened? It was all turned upside down. God called them to different ministries, and so I thought that was heartening that God has a sense of humor, and we don't particularly fit in with what He always wants us to do. Now, and let's look at verse 9 there. Paul and Barnabas were both given the right hand of fellowship, so that we might go to the Gentiles, and they to be and they to the circumcised. Now, a lot of times you just you've heard this expression. Well, we give them the right hand of fellowship, and that means okay, you shake hands, you say, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee, and that's it. That has kind of what it's been meant to today. But back in those days, it says that to give someone the right hand of fellowship was very significant. And I'm going to read it so that I don't mess it up. It's from a first century Jewish perspective. This is far more significant than we shook hands on it, as the right hand in the Semitic thought had some major significance regarding approval. In common with most cultures, the Old Testament and the New Testament assign special significance to the right hand of strength, the hand of blessing, and unique capacity. Albeit that most theologians agree that the hand of blessing or protection in Scripture is intended principally be the right hand, and that's in Exodus 6 and 8, Exodus 8, Deuteronomy 32 and 40. And in also First Maccabees 6:58, the historian Josephus attests that none of them will be deceived none of them will deceive you when once they have given you their right hands, nor will anyone doubt of their fidelity once that is or when that is once given, even though they were before suspected of injustice. Now, this is the Antiquities of the Jews, 18.329. Sorry, dyslexia kicked in. So to receive the right hand of fellowship from Yaakov, Peter, and John, all those who had been close personal interaction of friends with Yeshua, this was very serious, very significant. In testifying this, Paul's detractors could no longer claim that he was some kind of a rogue operating without Jerusalem's knowledge or their approval. And Paul also makes a further point in not just saying that James, Peter, and John gave him and Barnabas their right hand. Paul says that they gave him the right hand of fellowship, and employing the term in the Greek koinonia, the Jerusalem leaders extended Paul a close association involving mutual interest and sharing and association, communion, fellowship, a close relationship. So this koinonia group, the word group, is the idea of a close, very, very familial, close relationship. So Paul tells this to the Galatians so that they might understand how they have been misled, perhaps being told that Paul was at gross odds with Jerusalem. So, and then verse 10, in acknowledging the poor and giving alms, Paul is following the commandments of the Torah to be generous and to give to the poor. Here's another example of Paul following the Torah. Now, let's see. I got to catch up on some of the comments here. So, and we're going. Okay. Okay. Somebody says, how do you handle the commandments about body piercings and tattoos that are mentioned in the Torah? Well, when I was telling my story about the people going to, going to the people that look like them. All of these tattoos and the piercings and everything appeared. They got these things long before they were saved, and so it was after that they were called into a ministry to those kinds of people. I see it all the time. I have seen so many people with. They want to show their solidarity with the Jewish people, so they'll get a great big Star of David on their arm, or one fella had that. I've seen it. A fella had the messianic symbol, the menorah and the Star of David and the fish, that long symbol. Had it tattooed across his head, starting from right up at his hairline, going back to the back of his head, and then it had it on each calf of his leg. So I don't think anybody, they didn't explain that to him, and so to put it in, if you were going to confront him about it, it would be like Desi told Lucy. Said, Lucy, you got some splaining to do. So. A lot of people, they're just not taught. People are just not taught that the Bible does prohibit you to mark up your skin and to pierce your body. At the same time, we have what about women that pierce their ears and put earrings in them, or put the little earrings in them. And then you also go to the story of I believe it was. Abraham's servant Eliezer, where he went to find a wife for Isaac, and so when he found Jacob, or when he found Rebecca, what did he do? He gave her a ring for her nose. So I don't know how they attach those things. So anyway, I don't have a good answer for that, other than they did that long before they were saved. So the right hand of, let's see, another thing, the comment, the right hand of fellowship denotes a formal commissioning in which Yaakov, Kepha, and Yochanan committed themselves to Shaul and Barnabas as sharing in the same gospel work. And I think also even more so than this right hand of fellowship, fellowship and table fellowship, and that was so very important in those days that it was and especially it became even more important after the temple was destroyed, that your table fellowship became your sacrifice. And so that's why you see in later church circles that the idea of the Jew and the Gentile getting together, and some of the problems and how to work this out became very, very important to us. Today we don't realize it, but even back in those days, let me ask you a question. Just think about it before I explain it. Could a Jewish person and a pagan eat together? Could a Jew go to a pagan's house and eat back in those days? Would that have happened? Could that have happened? And according to some of the things that I learned this weekend, that my answer was no, it could not have happened. And the answer was yes, it could have happened, because there were writings about how that the pagan hosts would make accommodations for their Jewish guests, and would try to accommodate them. And I thought, well, I'd never heard that before. But this came from the guy who is now head of King's University, and he's got, I don't know how many PhDs in this sort of stuff. And so he said, yes, they could have. It was not something that was common, but it did happen, especially for reasons of commerce, politics, and that sort of thing on a high level basis. And you also remember that Yeshua did fellowship with people who the normal run of the Jewish establishment would have considered him to be in violation of their halakha by eating with publicans and sinners. Remember, he was called, he couldn't do anything right, because if he didn't eat with them, then he was one thing. If he did eat with them, he was a wine bibber and a glutton. So Yeshua just couldn't do it. He couldn't please them anyway. But he did go and eat with Zacchaeus, the tax collector. And although I've heard that Zacchaeus was possibly a Jewish guy that had basically betrayed his people, kind of like Matthew was a tax collector also. So anyway, that ends my prepared portions for tonight. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.